Hello there, you're watching the nightly news program coming to you live on All 24 News Channel here from Algiers. Let's have a look at today's top stories. Algeria intensifies efforts to mobilize international support for its membership in the UN Security Council, in Syria commends Algeria's pioneering role in promoting Arab reunification. Libyan National Unity Government confirms that its operations on the country's western coast target crime and smuggling dens, that it has no intention of settling political scores. Also coming up, UN Security Council extends the mandate of the United Nations mission in Sudan for 6 months, and relief organizations complain from bureaucracy and looting that impede the delivery of humanitarian aid. Also ahead, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirms his country's readiness to launch a counterattack on Russian forces, and the European Union affirms that stopping Western support for Ukraine will end the war. Hello again and welcome to the details. First off in our news, Algerian Foreign Minister Mr. Ahmed Attaf seeks more support for Algeria to receive a non-permanent seat in the Security Council by holding meetings with his counterparts from Africa and Latin America. This comes as part of studying ways to activate the unified defense of Africa and developing countries in the Security Council. Mr. Attaf also had meetings with officials of the UN organization to promote dialogue, peace and security on the African continent. Syrian Foreign Affairs Minister Faisal al-Miqdad praised Algeria's role to promote Arab reunification and the efforts that culminated in the return of his country to the League of Arab States. This came after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad had awarded Algerian ambassador in Damascus, Mr. Hassan Touhami, with the Syrian Order of Merit of the Excellent Class as an appreciation of his efforts in developing Syrian-Algerian relations, in a farewell ceremony held by the Syrian Foreign Ministry on the occasion of the end of his duties as Algerian ambassador to Syria. While supervising a conference on financing and bank accompaniment for investment projects, Algerian Minister of Finance, Laziz Fayed, revealed that economy financing loans exceeded $100 billion, recording its highest level ever. Zahra Farjani reports.
For the first time in Algerian history, the volume of bank loans and financial assistance directed to economic projects has exceeded the threshold of $100 billion. During a conference on banking support for investment organized by the Algerian Agency for Investment Promotion, Algerian Minister of Finance revealed that 70% of these loans is allocated for funding investment projects.
With regard to national economy financial supplies, the volume of various loans granted by banks and financial institutions exceeds 10,000 billion Algerian dinars, 70% of which is directed to investment.
National banks aim through funding investment projects to create new job opportunities, reinforce Algerian economy, and broaden its presence in neighboring African countries' markets.
Banks seek through financial investment projects to contribute to the creation of the largest possible number of jobs and to strengthen competitiveness, the national economy, and the ability to improve product quality. They also seek to accompany national institutions to export abroad, especially to the African continent, by virtue of the geographical location of Algeria.
Algerian Finance Minister also harked back to the recent reforms the Algerian government made. to encourage national and foreign investment to diversify national economy away from hydrocarbon sector.
إن الحكومة الجزائرية قامت منذ سنتين
2 years ago, the Algerian government carried out a set of important reforms that would improve investment in Algeria, beginning with a legal amendment related to investment, which comes as part of a general policy aimed at diversifying the national economy and supporting economic growth.
Truly, these measures reflect Algerian government's will to pave the way to a suitable environment for attracting investors, albeit foreign or national economic operators, so as the latter can effectively contribute to creating national wealth and job opportunities.
Algeria recorded more than 2,300 projects with a value of more than $7 billion from last November to the 25th of last May. The CEO of Algerian Agency for Investment Promotion, Mr. Omar Wakash, stated that the country received during the same period 49 foreign investment projects, including 16 direct projects and 33 in partnership.
The number of registered projects, starting from November 1st, 2022 until last May 25th, reached 2,318 investment projects, 41 of which are related to foreigners, 16 foreign direct investment, and 33 partnership projects. As long as we are talking about financing, the total amount authorized for these investments has reached more than 1,014 billion dinars, equivalent to more than $7 billion.
To more international economic news, the OPEC Plus kicked off 2 days of talks on Saturday, which may culminate in further production cuts of as much as 1 million barrels per day, as the organization faces flagging oil prices and a looming supply surplus. The first meeting of ministers of countries member of the OPEC Plus and its allies did not discuss any market-related issues. However, sources stated that cuts would be discussed among options over the weekend event. To some other regional news now. The International Association of Jurists for Western Sahara condemned the Moroccan authorities for preventing 2 Spanish lawyers from visiting their clients in their occupied Sahrawi capital, El Ayoun, after hours of arrest and malicious treatment. The human rights body stated that the 2 lawyers wanted to verify the complaints of relatives of Sahrawi political prisoners regarding the human rights violations committed by the occupation authorities. In addition, the board of directors of the Human Rights Commission in Madrid called on the international community and the government of Spain to put pressure on Morocco and push it to comply with international legitimacy. To Libya now. The government of national unity said it has targeted smuggling gangs in western regions. However, fears of an escalation rose after strikes hit factions linked with figures opposed to Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibeh. Meanwhile, Security Council renews authorization to inspect vessels suspected of violating Libya arms embargo. More details with Salman Sib.
Libya's government of national unity stepped up drone strikes on Friday against what is said were smuggling gangs. The attacks targeted many western regions in the country. Meanwhile, in eastern Libya, the national parliament said this week the drone strikes were aimed at settling political scores, saying one had targeted factions linked with figures opposed to Prime Minister Dbeibeh, prompting outrage among critiques of the government national unity and fears of an escalation. For his part, during a meeting in Tripoli, the Libyan Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, Abdelhamid Dbeibeh, discussed the developments of the ongoing security operation in the western region to combat criminal gangs.
We heard noise in the whole western region. Enough is enough. We cannot handle these criminals anymore. And who do you think they are targeting? Of course you. And they target us as we make decisions to fight these gangs and these smugglers.
The Prime Minister also praised the professionalism of the Air Force, which carried out the task assigned to it in coordination with the other bodies of the armed forces and intelligence agencies.
These are your men, the armed forces men. Heroes that always make sure to keep all Libyans safe, including our land. They tell us the truth about what's happening in the country. And these operations are not political, but accurate, as well as studied.
In addition, Dbeiba announced the end of the first phase of the military operations against armed gangs organized crime in the West Coast region, giving numbers from the latest report.
The results of the first phase of the operations included the destruction of 7 boats used for human trafficking, 6 warehouses for drug dealers, weapons and equipment used by criminal gangs, and 9 tanks used to smuggle fuel abroad.
At the international level, the Security Council decided to renew measures designed to implement the arms embargo against Libya for another year. In particular, those authorizing member states acting nationally or through regional organizations to inspect vessels on the high seas off Libya's coast believed to be in violation of the arms embargo imposed on that country.
In Mali, the long-awaited referendum campaign on the new constitution, which is expected to be voted on the 18th of June, has been launched. According to the Independent High Authority for Elections, the campaign will continue until the 16th of June. 8,400,000 voters have been distributed to more than 13,000 polling centers across the country. The streets of Senegal's capital, Dakar, were filled with rebel and ransacked shops on Saturday morning after some of the most violent clashes the country has seen in at least 10 years between anti-government protesters and police. Angry over the sentencing on Thursday of populist opposition leader Ousmane Sonko, crowds protested in several Dakar neighborhoods, including the university, starting fires and throwing rocks at security forces after his party mobilized supporters.
What happened here is worrying. The demonstrators arrived to ransack Auchan, but the police could no longer contain the crowd. They did everything they could to stop them. They were forced to fall back and fire tear gas at the crowd to disperse them. But that did not stop the demonstrators from coming back.
Fighting has intensified in Khartoum as well as Darfur, despite UN sanctions that were imposed due to the collapse of ceasefire talks. Let's follow the full story by Usama Ayati.
The 15-member Security Council extended the UN political mission UNITAM's Friday in war-torn Sudan for 6 months instead of 1 year, with unanimous consent. Sudanese Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan accused UN envoy Volker Perthes of inflaming the worsening conflict. In a letter last week sent to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he demanded that Volker be removed. With this move, however, Guterres and the Security Council reaffirmed full support for UNITAMs led by Volker Perthes.
The Council has sent a unified endorsement of the United Nations Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, UNITAMS. I would like to pay tribute to the efforts of all UN staff in Sudan and supporting from outside, who continue to do vital work under extremely challenging circumstances.
The conflict-hit African nation has been engulfed by violence for weeks between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces GREB after the collapse of talks to maintain the ceasefire and ease a humanitarian crisis. Sudan's warring parties fought in the capital on Friday. Residents of Khartoum and Omdurman across the Nile reported that the army had resumed airstrikes using more artillery. These clashes had not triggered any retreat of the Rapid Support Forces from streets and homes they had occupied.
Such as a ceasefire is meaningless. We do not need this kind of ceasefire. We hope that the crisis can be resolved through a permanent ceasefire. But now it's just an endless cycle between firing and ceasefire. The conflicting parties should reach an agreement as soon as possible. Otherwise, the firing will never be stopped.
In addition to the fierce fighting, widespread looting and red tape are hampering efforts to deliver vital humanitarian supplies to millions of people who now rely on a relief effort for survival. The UN agency said it had already lost supplies in Sudan worth $60 million during the conflict, at a time when the country needs $2.6 billion to meet aid necessities this year. For its part, the White House announced sanctions against Sudanese companies Thursday in an attempt to hold the fighting parties accountable and to deny them the resources, funds, and weapons that have enabled them to perpetuate this horrific conflict. Despite these sanctions imposed after the collapse of a U.S. and Saudi brokered truce, fighting worsened still in Sudan.
We are talking about over a month of uninterrupted fighting with some ceasefire agreements that have been functioning sometimes not, and at some point the fighting subsided, but also there's just the general state of lawlessness. The lootings have been widespread, and just like the general criminality, and that of course adds a different layer and makes it an extremely.
In addition to civilians killed in the war, at least 8 aid workers were killed in the fighting. Several ceasefires have been agreed, but they have been routinely violated.
Chief of the UN Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees, Philip Lazzarini, on Thursday, warned of the approaching of a tipping point in the delivery of the services of the agency. Lazzarini added that the crisis is real. UNRWA provides services to almost 6 million Palestinians registered in the occupied Palestinian territories and neighboring countries.
Palestinian refugees' resilience in the face of adversity and displacement should not blind us from the underlying human tragedy unfolding. In the Gaza Strip, beyond the destruction and the loss of lives and livelihood, we face a psychosocial crisis with longer-term consequences. Half of the UNRWA students there are traumatized and need specialized support to continue learning.
All the way to India now, at least 288 people have died in India's worst rail crash in over 2 decades after a passenger train went off the tracks and hit another one in an accident, a preliminary report blamed on signal failure. Relatives of some of the victims of the accident visited a makeshift morgue to identify the bodies of their loved ones.
261 is the current number which the state government has published. We think that now more or less we have reached a level where we understand each and every passenger who was traveling in this. Large number of passengers have already reached their homes after taking the compensation amount.
And by this unfortunate ordeal, Algeria offered its sincere condolences to the families of the victims of the accident that occurred Friday between several trains in eastern India. This came in a statement by the Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which extended Algeria's sincere condolences to the families of the victims and its sincere prayers for a prompt recovery for the injured. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country was ready to launch a counterattack against Russian forces. Zelensky added that Ukraine believes that the counterattack against Russia will succeed. This comes as the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, considered the conflict in Ukraine could end in a few weeks if the West stopped providing military support to Kiev.
Some words about how I know how to finish the war in Ukraine. I know, it's quite easy. We stop supporting military Ukraine and the war will finish in a couple of weeks. But how it will finish? Does it matter? Or doesn't matter? If it matters, then we cannot stop supporting military Ukraine. Because we don't want the peace, which is the peace of the cemeteries, the peace of the surrender, the peace of the stronger, the peace that makes Ukraine a second Belarus.
A senior Chinese military official lashed out at the United States, accusing it of making false accusations against China. Earlier on Saturday, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin vowed that Washington would not stand for what he called any coercion and bullying of its allies and partners by China. Austin assured Beijing that the U.S. remains committed to maintaining the status quo on Taiwan and would prefer dialogue over conflict. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has taken the oath of office for a new 5-year presidential term. Erdogan has promised this new term will be dedicated to establishing the century of Turkey's. Nabil Khazini.
On the day he takes office, the Turkish president arrived to the capital with a shower of flowers on his car. Much love shown for Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is now the longest-serving leader in Turkey, with his rule extended into a third decade.
At the beginning of my words, I thank my Lord for giving us the opportunity to serve Turkey and the Turkish nation for another 5 years. I would like to express my gratitude to each and every member of my beloved nation who contributed to this with their support and favor with their votes.
High-level officials from 78 countries, including Algeria, attended a big ceremony at the presidential palace. As such was the first step for Erdogan towards establishing a new era for Turkey, or the century of Turkey. This era, says President Erdogan, will strengthen the Turkish democracy with a new free civil constitution, far from the current one.
We will embrace all 85 million people, regardless of their political views, origins, creeds, or sects. During the 21 years of our rule, we have always maintained this sensitivity. We did not look at anyone's belief or the color of their vote while serving.
The Turkish president takes the seat of power for another 5 years. But with a fuzzy global geopolitical scene already plunged into divisions, Erdogan's roadmap towards establishing what he aims for will be full of challenges. Erdogan started his project by announcing a brand new cabinet following his re-election in Turkey's May runoff vote. Only 2 ministers retained their seats and many new faces were brought to usher in the new era.
President Joe Biden on Saturday signed a bill that suspends the U.S. government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling, averting what would have been a first-ever default. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives and the Senate passed the legislation this week after Biden and House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy reached an agreement following tense negotiations. The Treasury Department had warned it would be unable to pay all its bills on June 5th if Congress had failed to act by then. Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso stated on Friday that he does not intend to participate in the early election, which will take place next August in the country. Lasso posted a video on his Twitter page and announced that he will not run for re-election. The Ecuadorian president is governing by decree after evoking a constitutional mechanism earlier this month to dissolve the National Assembly legislature and cut his presidency short amid an impeachment process against him. For more news making headlines around the globe, here is the news in brief by Sofian Kinturi this time.
Tens of thousands of people gathered in the center of Serbian capital, Belgrade, for the fifth anti-government protests in recent weeks. The protests were sparked by 2 mass shootings in early May that left 18 people dead and several wounded. Half of those killed were students at Belgrade Elementary School. Japan was hit by heavy rains on Friday and early Saturday that flooded streets and disrupted transport. The torrential rains came as tropical storm Mawar passed south of Japan's main island of Honshu, with the humid air from the storm feeding into a rain front, touching off heavy localized rains. Residents in the United States gathered on streets to call for an end to gun violence. On the National Gun Violence Awareness Day, hundreds of people attended an anti-gun violence gathering at the Freedom Plaza in U.S. capital city, Washington, D.C., with a slogan of prevention. The gathering aims to enhance people's awareness and reduce gun violence. Some 10,000 residents in coastal Quebec were forced to evacuate homes on Friday as wildfires engulf more Canadian provinces in what is emerging as one of the worst starts of the forest fire season.
And finally, to a sports note now, USM Algiers claimed the Confederation African Cup after winning 2-1 in the first game against the Young Africans in Tanzania last week and losing 1-0 in the 5th of July Stadium in Algeria. By this, USM Algiers marked history and won its first continental title. For his part, President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, congratulated the USM Algiers team on their historic win through his official Twitter account. The end of our program for tonight. For more, our social media platforms and our website are under your service. Thank you for watching and take care for now.